If it's Monday, the Maui wildfires are now the deadliest in modern U.S. history. Officials facing growing criticism about whether enough was done to warn residents as the disaster unfolded. I'll talk to Hawaii's governor about the road to recovery and whether his state was properly prepared. Plus, former President Trump lashes out at prosecutors, judges, and witnesses as a potential fourth indictment looms in Georgia, where charging decisions in a years-long election interference case could come at any time. And Democratic Congressman Dean Phillips urges President Biden not to run and for Democrats to wage a competitive primary for president amid new legal and political problems facing the White House. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington. We begin today with the heartbreaking scene on the Hawaiian island of Maui, where the death toll from last week's devastating wildfires is now 96, making it the deadliest wildfire in modern United States history. And sadly, officials expect that number to rise. As of this morning, only 3% of the affected area had been searched. Recovery efforts, including those in the historic town of Lahaina, have been hampered because local law enforcement can't safely enter the destroyed buildings. More personnel, including FEMA and the National Guard, as well as specialist teams, are now deployed to search through the burnt-out ruins and rubble for those still unaccounted for. FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell spoke at the White House briefing this afternoon.
As we have learned what the extent of this search and recovery mission is going to look like, we have sent more personnel as well as more cadaver dogs to come into the area. And they are working in conjunction with the Maui Fire Department and the Sheriff's Office to make sure that we are doing this in a very methodical way, but one that is also very respectful of the community, to make sure that we find everybody that is unaccounted for.
Hawaii's Governor Josh Green toured the scene this weekend. He described the total devastation he saw in a video message last night.
When I say destruction, having been at ground zero twice, there is very little left there. Now, what does that mean? That means that over 2,700 structures were destroyed in Lahaina, and an estimated value of $5.6 billion has gone away. But mostly there are people are suffering.
I will talk to the governor about what he's seen and what his constituents need later this hour. And I'll also speak to him about why the state's warning sirens weren't activated. Meanwhile, some residents of Lahaina have been able to return in a limited capacity as they begin the long road toward rebuilding. Many residents remain in shelters, relying on community support and government for necessities. In the midst of the tragedy, we've also seen heartwarming scenes like this one, locals coming together to deliver crucial food and supplies to their neighbors by boat. I'm joined now by NBC News correspondent Dana Griffin, who is in Maui. So, Dana, what is the very latest on the ground there and the latest on the search and recovery efforts?
Kristen, we're seeing a lot of donations still being brought to shelters like this one behind me. As far as the recovery effort, as you mentioned, the FEMA administrator said this is going to take some time because although they are bringing in those extra cadaver dogs, they have a strict work and rest kind of regimen because these dogs have to make sure that they are safe. And also there's some concerns about the structures of the building. Some of them are partially standing, so they've got to bring in some engineers to make sure they are safe for the dogs and the search and rescue teams to go in. This is likely going to take weeks, if not months, to get through. It is unclear how many bodies will likely be found, but it is estimated to be in the hundreds. Kristen?
It is just devastating to think of the scope of the loss there. Dana, you're talking to community members there. What are they saying to you about what they need most urgently right now? We know that there are a lot of agencies there helping with food and resources, but what's the most urgent need?
I would say the most urgent need right now is housing. They are moving a lot of the evacuees into hotel rooms today. There's about 500 that have been reserved for them. But those hotel rooms are only going to be available for 30 days. So the big need right now is permanent housing, because it's not like, they were displaced because of a fire and they get to return home. They have lost everything, and you're talking about 2,700 buildings, most of those homes. So you've got hundreds, if not thousands, of people who are going to need a place to live. The governor has even appealed for people across Hawaii to open up their homes to those residents. I've also spoken to people who have been very frustrated, some even at local tourists, because they say that they've seen people in the water snorkeling and swimming as bodies were still being pulled out of the water. And we actually heard from a company here, Maui Snorkeling. They actually issued an apology because on the morning of the 11th, they did take a tour out to go snorkel. And they said that was because they wanted to use 100% of the proceeds from that trip to go to the Maui Food Bank. But they realized that it caused so much distress because, as the FEMA administrator mentioned, this is about also preserving the sanctity of these bodies and showing respect to these bodies. And that is a really big thing here on Maui. It is a very important thing to the people here to make sure that respect is first and foremost given. That snorkeling company has since suspended its operations until further notice. Kristen?
Well, it underscores just how much pain and suffering there is there. Dana Griffin, thank you for being on the ground there for us. We really appreciate it. And again, I will speak with Hawaii's Governor Josh Green later this hour. We want to turn now to Georgia, where developments today suggest former President Trump could face a fourth indictment at any minute. The pace has picked up inside the Fulton County courthouse, where District Attorney Fani Willis appears to be presenting her case on election interference to a grand jury. That's happening as we speak. At least half of the 10 witnesses expected to take the stand have testified, according to sources speaking to our reporting team on the ground. Journalist George Chitty, who was supposed to testify tomorrow, confirmed that he was asked to come in today instead. And former Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan's testimony was also moved up to today. That's according to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution newspaper. 2 additional witnesses in the case were also spotted at the courthouse earlier today. Now, it comes as the former president is lashing out at the DA's office and publicly urging the former lieutenant governor not to testify, raising questions about potential witness tampering. This weekend, while campaigning in Iowa, Mr. Trump remained defiant as my colleague Von Hilliard asked him about the case.
Is there any chance you take a plea deal in Georgia?
We did nothing wrong. We don't ever take a plea deal.
Yes, sir.
We don't take plea deals. It's a wise guy question.
Are you going to change
It's a wise guy. We don't take plea deals because I did nothing wrong. It's called election interference.
Well, the former president this weekend also lashed out at Judge Tanya Chutkin, who's presiding over his election interference case in Washington, even after being warned by the judge not to take any actions that could compromise the integrity of the proceeding. On social media, the former president reposted a picture of the judge while also posting, quote, "She obviously wants me behind bars, very biased, very unfair." For more now, I'm joined by NBC's Garrett Hake in Atlanta, and also with me is Carol Lamb, former U.S. attorney and current NBC News legal analyst. So, Garrett, let me start with you there on the ground in Georgia. The urgency of this, do you have a sense of the timing of when we might get a decision and a vote on whether they will indict?
Well, Kristen, the first 3 Trump indictments all happened later than we thought they would. This one seems like it's on track to possibly happen sooner. You mentioned George Chitty, the journalist who is supposed to testify tomorrow. We just watched him walk up the courthouse steps behind me to go in and begin his testimony a few minutes ago. Furthermore, the judge who's presiding over this case just told reporters in his courtroom that we should basically make some early dinner plans and stick around, that it doesn't seem as though this courthouse will be closing up at 5 today. And every indication, and it's just tea leaf reading at this point, is that this grand jury does intend to kind of keep working much later than they would otherwise. So we do seem to be barreling towards a conclusion of some kind. Whether that comes in the form of an indictment today, tomorrow, or not at all, it's still too early to say.
Whenever you get the stick around for dinner, that is undoubtedly one of the strongest tea leaves you can read, Garrett. There's no doubt about that. Garrett, talk to me about this confusion earlier regarding the court docket in Fulton County. This is potentially significant. I'm going to ask Carol Lim about it, too, but explain what happened here.
Yeah, this was a confusing moment that turned more than a few reporters' hair gray today when Reuters, the wire service, briefly posted something that they said was from the docket here in this case, suggesting that Donald Trump had been indicted on several counts, even posting a picture of what looked for all the world like a docket that you would see in a courthouse like this one. But just as quickly as it was posted, the story was changed to say that it appeared that perhaps this indictment was coming. That document, which Reuters said it has been posted on the Fulton County website, was removed, leaving all the rest of us to wonder whether it was some kind of misfire from the courthouse, a reportorial mistake, or just, perhaps something that got out earlier than it should have. We simply don't know the answer to that question, but it was a tantalizing look ahead, perhaps, at what might be coming down the pike. But, Kristen, we really don't know. It's the challenge with a secret process like a grand jury. Unless and until they hand up an indictment, we're left to guess and grasp at little pieces of information like that, just available for a fleeting moment, but captured by some eagle-eyed reporters at Reuters, it appears. Well,
you broke it down so well, Garrett. And Carol, I have to go to you on this point. I mean, Garrett makes the point, look, we don't know what happened here, why there was this apparent confusion, but could the former president's legal team seize on this and ask for a mistrial or try to use this to slow the legal proceedings? What do you make of that?
Kristen, I think that would be very unusual. I doubt that that would happen. It appears that if something was posted, it was posted in error by the court system. These things happen. And because no jury has been sworn yet and seated, there's really nothing, there's no relief to be asked for. This is still in the investigatory stage officially. The grand jury, as far as we know, has not returned an indictment. And so there's nothing to really complain about on the defense team's part. So I wouldn't expect to see that happen. It is interesting that something did get posted and they may have had something from the prosecutors in advance just to make sure they had something. This might be what the prosecutors expect to happen. But until the grand jury actually votes, we really don't know. They may not know. They may change their minds about certain counts in the indictment at the last minute. So there's a lot of uncertainty that attends to this sort of wrapping up of a grand jury proceeding. And it's not surprising to see some uncertainty at this point.
I want to ask you about the other piece of Garrett's reporting, something that is concrete, which is that former President Trump has been lashing out at Judge Chutkan online. What are the potential implications of that, given the warning that he got from Judge Chutkan?
Well, he is testing the limits. There's no question about that. Judge Chutkan has been proceeding in a very measured manner, which she has to. It's her responsibility to ensure the safety of everyone involved in these judicial proceedings, and she will do that. But she also has to do that in a very measured and very deliberate fashion. You can't just bang the gavel and say, I find you in contempt and you're going to jail. When you're a judge, you're actually cautioned that if you're ever going to use your contempt powers, it has to be in conformance with a lot of due process. So her job is to be fair but tough and ensure that the defendant has a lot of warning about what behaviors will or will not result in a finding of contempt. And there's, I think, still some distance to go, unless he says something that actually would make a reasonable person say, you know what, he's really inviting some sort of act of violence or some sort of intimidation against a witness or a court member. He may have a little runway left, but it's not going to last forever. She will take steps if she has to enforce her powers.
Speaking of which, Neil Katyal tweeted that Judge Chutkan may respond, quote, "It would not surprise me if Judge Chutkan called a hearing with Trump's presence, given his new remarks." Do you agree with that assessment, or do you think, as you say, there's more time before she takes any action whatsoever?
Well, I wouldn't disagree with Neil. I think different people might approach this differently. She may say, you know what, he's going to call me biased. He's going to lash out at the court system, but that is his First Amendment right, and he can say what he wants about how he thinks this prosecution is unfair. Again, it has to approach the level of endangering somebody's life because he seems to be inciting some kind of violence, or really saying something that may intimidate a witness or a potential juror or somebody on the court or a member of the opposite party. It's a judgment call here, and I think she's going to be careful. On the other hand, the former president has to be aware that whatever Judge Chutkan does, if she does take measures, and even if he decides to appeal it or take a writ of mandate or something up to a higher court, her actions are going to be judged by other judges, and other judges care a lot about keeping control of their courtrooms. So I think that you can see the way she's been proceeding. It's been very measured. And I think if she continues on that road, she will be upheld if she decides to take stronger measures.
Garrett, let me go back to you. Take us inside Trump world. I know you spend a lot of time talking to your sources there. How are they bracing for this potential fourth indictment? And you also have some new reporting on his thinking about the first debate.
Yeah, that's right, Kristen. So they're in a little bit of a holding pattern right now, like the rest of us. They don't know exactly when this indictment will come down, when he might be arraigned, or how they would schedule around that. And they're left waiting, just as we are, to try to plan a campaign around that. Remember, there is that first debate scheduled for next week, which I was able to report out today. Donald Trump still has not decided whether he's going to attend. His whole senior campaign staff is telling him, don't do it. You don't need to show up. It's not in your best interest. But he's tempted by it, and he's been bouncing ideas off people who he's been talking to about the prospect of going, perhaps deciding at more or less the last minute to make a splashy entrance. Meantime, his campaign is raising money off the expectation game and the question of will he or won't he. But for now, they're in the same boat we are. The former president hosted a golf tournament at his club in New Jersey this weekend, which he apparently very much enjoyed and was very active at. But right now, there's nothing on his political calendar but to wait, basically, through this next week and see what happens.
Fascinating stuff. And of course, he has that double-digit lead over Ron DeSantis, his nearest rival. That will undoubtedly factor into his ultimate decision about whether to attend. Great conversation. Garrett Hake, Carol Lamb, thank you both so much. And coming up, we'll talk about that. Candidates, caucus goers, and butter cows will have key takeaways from the all-important Iowa State Fair, where Donald Trump skipped some of the main events, but still stole the spotlight. That's next. And as I mentioned, my one-on-one interview with the governor of Hawaii is ahead as questions swirl around the wildfire response, including why a statewide emergency alert system was silent. You're watching Meet the Press now. Stay with us. Welcome back. Top Republican presidential candidates converged at the Iowa State Fair this weekend to make their pitch to potential caucus goers while sampling the fried food and flipping a few pork chops. But despite the carnival atmosphere, the stakes in Iowa could not be higher. If former President Trump wins the caucuses, it's hard to see how any other candidate gets enough momentum to keep him from the nomination, even as will likely be in the midst of multiple criminal trials. Mr. Trump's Republican rivals tried to both directly and indirectly contrast themselves with him this weekend at the fair. Here's Nikki Haley with my NBC colleague, Ali Vitale.
He's going to spend a lot of time in courts and with judges and with lawyers, and we'll let him do that. But we have a country to save, and I'm focused on talking about the issues that really matter to Americans.
NBC's Ali Vitale joins me now from Des Moines, Iowa. Ali, thank you, and great interview. Give me big picture. What are you hearing from Republicans who you're talking to at the fair this weekend? Are a lot of the winds blowing toward former President Trump?
Well, yeah, if you look at the polls, Kristen, but you know as well as I do that the Iowa State Fair the year before the caucus is really one of the big kickoff moments of the presidential primary calendar. It's why we saw so many presidential contenders, including the former president, come here and flock to the fair, most of them on Saturday, but certainly over the course of the last few days and into tomorrow, you'll see most of the field having made an appearance here. But Trump really is the man to watch continuously, not just in the polls, but also in terms of the attention that he was able to leverage on the ground. He really was the person who was setting the tone, both in the events that he had, but then also the ways in which he was trying to troll his chief rival, Ron DeSantis, bringing lawmakers from the Florida delegation who have endorsed Trump, not their sitting governor, also flying a plane overhead that said, "Be likable, Ron," and Ron was in the font of Jeb Bush's 2016 campaign, complete with that exclamation point at the end. It's clear that he was trying to get a rise out of Ron DeSantis, who really is trying to get his feet back under him and gain some traction here in this important state after stumbles and shakeups within his own campaign. But I think the indictments are the right thing to focus on, Kristen. Certainly that's where we're looking and where the rest of the calendar is going to be looking for the former president. But for voters that I talked to, there are some who are squarely behind him and some who wish, in light of the indictments and everything else, that the party could just move past them. Here are some of those conversations. Watch.
There's some stuff that he was doing that I think was going in the right direction, but because of who he is, I think if another candidate would have done it, you know, it would have succeeded.
Does Trump have any share of that blame for the 6th?
Oh, he was president. Yeah, absolutely. You know, I mean, the buck stops there.
But you'd still vote for him again?
For Trump? Yeah, absolutely. He was a good president. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of people are living paycheck to paycheck right now, and it's getting worse. And it was times were a little bit better back then.
Look, that last voter, Kristen, was so striking to me because even in the course of our conversation, you see him say that Trump had a part to play in January 6th. And then in the next breath, I make sure to say, are you still going to vote for him? And he says, yeah, he was a good president. I think that's the dynamic that we're watching play out on the ground and in the polls.
Just fascinating interviews all around, Allie. Let me ask you quickly before I let you go. There were, of course, a couple of fringe candidates there, challengers to President Joe Biden. And you talked to one of them. Yeah. You talked to anti-vaccine candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. What did you hear from him?
Yeah, look, a controversial candidate, a long shot for the presidency on the Democratic side, but certainly still running. And one of the key issues that we've seen time and time again since the Dobbs decision last year in the Supreme Court was the ways that abortion is kind of in real time reshaping the presidential map and reshaping politics, clearly a key motivator for voters. And look, in D.C., you and I have watched from our respective beats at the White House and in Congress the ways that Democrats have sought to enshrine abortion protections at the federal level. They have not been able to do it, but one of the big pushes has been around enshrining the protections that were previously provided by the Roe versus Wade precedent into the federal law. That's not something they've been able to do, but I asked Kennedy if that's something he would do if elected. Instead, he said to me that he thinks that abortion should be protected up to 3 months into a pregnancy. He then later said that he thought that it should be up until the point of viability. Those are two different things, of course. Viability is at 24 weeks. I asked him if he would pass an abortion ban or a cap at 15 weeks. He said yes. At 21 weeks, he said yes. Hours later, he backtracked, but certainly that position put him out of step with the rest of the Democratic primary.
Just fascinating. Clearly still working through his answers on what is going to be a critical issue for every single candidate. Allie Vitale, great work. As always, thank you so much. With me on set now is Amy Walter, publisher and editor-in-chief of the Cook Political Report. Amy, great to see you, as always.
Great to be here.
So let's talk about Iowa and the importance of Iowa. I mean, we talk about the importance of Iowa every election cycle, but in this case, it really could be game over.
Yeah, I think you set it up really well in your opening, where this really is the place where Trump either basically can wrap up the nomination if he easily dispatches with his opponents, and most specifically Ron DeSantis, who in most recent polling he's ahead by somewhere 15, 20 points. Even if Trump were to lose Iowa, remember he came up short in 2016, he has a very different campaign than he did even in 2016. This is a campaign that's made up of actual professionals, people who have been doing the groundwork on some of the delegate rules, doing the dotting the I's and crossing the T's that you know very well, the team that was with him in 2016. Not really that focused on doing those sorts of things. So even if you get some momentum as the alternative to Trump after Iowa, the Trump campaign is very clearly prepared for what comes next, what the delegate strategy is going to be next, and also working with those states and those delegates to ensure that they get the best possible rules for their candidate.
It was this fascinating strategy, Amy, that he brought Florida officials with him to kind of this show of support, to thumb in the nose of Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis' whole goal is to reboot his campaign, to turn his campaign around. Do you think he gained any ground this weekend?
I don't know. I mean, I heard from some folks who were there said, you know, when you talk to people on the ground, it's a different perspective than folks here in Washington. Of course, it's always like that. And I spent some time talking with Sarah Longwell. She runs something called the Focus Group podcast. She talks to lots and lots and lots of Republican voters. She pointed out that voters who've soured on Republican voters specifically who've soured on DeSantis, it's not because of him necessarily as a person or a candidate. It's just that he's not connecting with them. I think that the biggest challenge for him to reboot his campaign is that the message he should have been campaigning on from the very beginning, I'm the electable alternative, now doesn't sound as pleasing to voters' ears when he's just simply, he doesn't look as successful as he once did, right? He's dropping in the polls in the Republican primary, and he's not any more popular in many of these states than Donald Trump is among all voters.
And the staff shakeups, Amy,
Right.
feed this narrative
That's right.
that we've seen this before,
That's
that we've
right.
seen this with a fledgling campaign before. Are there any candidates who you have your eye on in terms of who may be gaining ground here? I mean, I hear Senator Scott's
That's
name
right.
mentioned quite a bit. Obviously, a lot of eyes on Nikki Haley as well.
Nikki Haley and Vivek Ramaswamy. Also, he comes up a lot. When I talk to folks who are doing focus groups, his name comes up a lot, in part because he's just so different from the other candidates. He does not cut a traditional political profile. Tim Scott is the one most people are keeping their eyes on, in part because he has the operation and the money going forward. But in terms of who's making that direct contrast with Trump, DeSantis clearly upping his game there.
Very quickly, you heard Ali say that RFK is trying to work out his answer on abortion in real time. Is this because he hasn't quite sorted through it, or is it because he's appealing to a Republican electorate?
Yeah, or that he just simply this is just not his place that he wants to be spending a whole lot of time. But it definitely builds into the point you just made, which many Democrats have, which is that he is just simply a plant here, put forward by allies of Donald Trump to kind of mess with Joe Biden. But remember, if you look at the polling, it's not really helping him in a Democratic primary to be affiliated either with that position or with allies of Donald Trump.
All right. Fascinating as always.
Thank you.
To talk
Great to see you.
Amy Walter, great to see you. Thank you. And up next, turn the page. A House Democrat makes his case for a primary challenge against President Biden amid the new legal peril facing his son, Hunter. You're watching Meet the Press now.
I'm a representative, and I'm representing what I believe to be the majority of the country that wants to turn the page. Tired of the meanness and the fear-mongering of Donald Trump, I would like to see Joe Biden, a wonderful and remarkable man, pass the torch, cement this extraordinary legacy.
Welcome back. That was Minnesota Democratic Congressman Dean Phillips with Chuck making the case for a legitimate primary challenge to President Biden. It comes as the president's reelection campaign now has to contend with a newly announced special counsel overseeing the investigation into Mr. Biden's son, Hunter, all but assuring more uncomfortable questions facing the White House heading into 2024. Additionally, a recent New York Times Siena poll has 50% of Democratic primary voters saying the party should nominate someone other than President Biden in 24. Joining me now on set is Dan Merica, national political reporter at The Messenger, Democratic strategist and NBC News political analyst Juanita Tolliver, and Stephen Hayes, editor and CEO of The Dispatch and also an NBC News political analyst. Thanks to all of you for being here. Dan, welcome to the panel.
Thank you.
Let me start with you. What do you make of these comments by Dean Phillips? Do you think he's going to encourage someone else to get in?
I mean, your polling shows he's saying something that a lot of Democratic voters think. The problem is this is the analogy I'm going to make, he is a relay runner running the first leg of the relay, hoping to hand the baton to somebody else, and nobody is there, so he's just kind of running in circles.
Great analogy.
The people who he would be handing the baton to, the Newsoms of the world, the Whitmers, the Pete Buttigiegs, either work for Joe Biden or are on his advisory board and basically are helping out his campaign as much as they can. So there's not a lot of appetite from the actual people who could challenge Joe Biden to do so. And part of that is because Joe Biden has proven that he can beat Donald Trump. And I think more than anything, Democrats want to defeat Donald Trump. And if they were betting right now, they would say Donald Trump was going to be the nominee. So why risk it with somebody who may be unproven?
Juanita, pick up on that analogy because I think it really sets the scene nicely, which is that he's trying to pass the baton. You have Senator Manchin, who's kind of
different scenario,
third party should he get in
versus...
a third party run? And then, but there's not really that Democrat standing in the wings waiting to catch the baton. And yet the polling's not good, 39%. approval rating for the president, with half of the voters saying they don't think he should run again in 2024.
Well, I'm thinking also about that initial poll you mentioned. It said someone, didn't name anyone, didn't have anything explicit there to offer. So without that cream filling, there is no one to pass the baton to. And so I keep thinking about all the people that you named who are linked to the president in his reelection campaign. And he was very strategic in that. He said, let me get you on my side. Let me get you committed for 2024. You can do what you want in 28, but this next cycle, let's understand the stakes here, and let's understand the evidence of I can beat Trump. I've beaten him before. I do have a strong legislative agenda, and I can go and do that again.
Stephen, you have this Hunter Biden news that now there is a special counsel investigating Hunter Biden. So by all accounts, there's a good chance this could go to trial right in the middle of this reelection campaign. Obviously, a political cloud for the president. Do Republicans run the risk of over-indexing on Hunter Biden as an issue, though?
I mean, they're definitely doing that.
I would say they already have, right?
You think they're already doing
look,
that?
I mean, look, we face this challenge as reporters, right? I mean, usually you get a couple sources, get 3 sources, you can trust it, you can run with the story. I don't feel like we can send our reporters to Capitol Hill and take what we're getting from some of these Republicans as the truth, as something that we can run with, because in some cases we've seen they'll go out and represent a transcribed interview, and 3 hours later we'll get the transcribed interview and it bears no resemblance. Having said all that, these were conversations about Joe Biden and his viability that were taking place before the midterms. The midterms gave him a bump, but those were questions about age. Those questions haven't gone anywhere. And I think there are real serious questions about what happened with this plea deal and Hunter Biden that are going to continue to dog Joe Biden because we don't have answers to so many of these questions. We know that Hunter Biden was involved in shady activity up and down and for years. We don't know how much it involves Joe Biden, if at all, but people will want to know. And those are real questions to be asking, even if Republicans are overplaying their hand.
Dan, take us inside the president's world and inner circle. How much concern is there? This was a plea deal. It seemed like this was all going to go away. And now they're in a whole new phase with the legal proceedings here. How concerned are they about this and that the president's going to get asked about this over and over again?
Yeah, I think there's some concern that it will kind of gum up a message they might want to make about Donald Trump's own legal exposure. They're not making that now. Clearly, President Biden won't touch it with a 10-foot pole. But I think during a campaign, you'd have a different message from the president. You know, if Hunter Biden is in the middle of a trial, if there's a drip, drip, drip of news coming from his camp and the special counsel, that might complicate things. And there's some concerns from Democrats there. I think the frustration is they felt like this was gonna be over. They felt like Hunter,
so close to
they felt like Hunter Biden was walking into that room. He was gonna get whatever he got, and that was gonna be mostly the end of it. Now that seems to be not only not the truth, it seems to be there is a high likelihood this is going to continue throughout the campaign.
Let me play a little bit more from Dean Phillips. He actually came up with some names for who he thinks could potentially be better candidates than Joe Biden. Let me play them. Get your reaction on the other side.
Who would you like to see in this race? I would like to see a moderate governor, hopefully from the heartland, from one of the 4 states that Democrats will need.
So let's see, Gretchen Whitmer. You'd like to see her, or is it Tim Walz, your home state governor, Tony Evers? Help me out here.
You just said a few names I think would be great. Josh Shapiro. There are a number of people. J.B. Pritzker. Some people have asked me that I not use their names because of this institutional fear that it might impact you down the road.
Juanita, pick up on the institutional fear. Are those any of the names that are being floated in Democratic circles? And just to pick up on this point, I mean, Democrats thought they were at the finish line with the Hunter Biden issue.
Right. I think those are names that absolutely have prospects in the future, not right now. And I think even in focus groups that I've seen, Gretchen Whitmer's name has come up repeatedly because of the work she's done on the ground in Michigan, whether that's infrastructure or protecting access to abortion rights. She is a rising star. Again, she is fully in alignment with supporting President Biden in 2024, and I think she's only going to stay there for now.
We'll talk about closing ranks. We are only seeing former President Trump's support get solidified, even though he's facing a potential 4th indictment. Stephen, I mean, do you, having watched what happened in Iowa this weekend, have any sense that anyone can compete with him in the primary?
Yeah, this is the one that will be his unraveling for sure. No. You can't say that. No, I mean, of course not. Look, I think this sounds like it could be different in a couple different ways based on reporting that we've seen over the weekend with some of the details about the potential involvement of senior Trump campaign officials or senior people in Trump world in trying to get into the voting systems. I mean, this is serious. This is all serious. Remains to be seen how the Trump base will take this information and process it, or whether they believe it or not. But those are serious claims. If they bear out, if that's what we see in an indictment, you could have some elected Republicans raise some eyebrows.
Dan?
We were talking about this before. Donald Trump seems to have a hold on the Republican base that is almost unbreakable. I'm not sure whether I don't think it's a fourth time's a charm for Donald Trump. And it seems like maybe he has a very high floor, but very low ceiling in some cases. And that might be the determinative factor in the general election.
What I'm curious about, Dan, I've spoken to some Democrats who say, Trump is President Biden's best chance of winning. But I'm starting to hear that narrative shift a little bit right now. What are you hearing?
I actually think, to get back to the age point, I think it helps Joe Biden that Donald Trump is not exactly a young, vivacious governor and isn't challenging him on that age point. I mean, it's very difficult for Donald Trump to make that case. They're only about 4 years apart, something like that.
Close.
I think maybe that's what you're seeing is it has less to do with the indictments and more to do with it takes away a huge argument Republicans could make against the sitting president.
And that tracks with 2020. Remember, a lot of voters turned out to reject Trump, not necessarily because they were over the moon about Biden. And I think that's what we're going to see again in 2024. Biden is the one who is actually trying to protect our democracy, protect our basic rights, whereas we have Trump, who is facing multiple federal criminal indictments and multiple potentially state indictments.
Well, Trump says he only needs one more indictment to win, basically, the whole thing, Stephen. I mean, it seems like he's just increasingly emboldened, and yet you do have other candidates like Senator Scott, like Nikki Haley, gaining a little ground around the edges. Would it make a difference if they all started to sing from the same book and say a candidate who has this much legal baggage can't win a general election?
I mean, first, we have to say, I think some of that is bravado from Donald Trump. I mean, there's been credible reporting that he's actually very nervous about this in private. We should acknowledge that. Look, I don't know that I don't think that there's an obvious tipping point. If they all say the same thing, it's the end of Donald Trump. That said, you're not going to beat Donald Trump unless you drive a contrast. And being the subject of so many federal indictments, many of which I think are credible based on real information, it's sort of an obvious thing for a candidate to challenge him on. I think they'd be crazy not to.
All right, great conversation. Thank you all for being here on a Monday afternoon. Appreciate it, Dan, Juanita, and Stephen. And after the break, we will be joined live by the governor of Hawaii as his state deals with the aftermath of the deadliest wildfire in modern U.S. history. You're watching Meet the Press now. Please do stay with us. Welcome back. As we said at the beginning of the show, Maui is at the beginning of a long and expensive recovery. After devastating wildfires leveled hundreds of homes and businesses, nearly 100 people are confirmed dead, and first responders are searching for hundreds of people still unaccounted for. And now questions are mounting both about the government's response in the lead up to the fire and what comes next for those who have lost everything. Hawaii Governor Josh Green joins me now. Governor Green, my deepest condolences to you and your community. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, and thank you for your prayers. We need them, and we feel them from far away.
Well, we are sending them, and we appreciate your joining us in what is a really devastating time for you and your community. Can you tell us what the very latest is on the ground there in Hawaii, the very latest on the search and recovery efforts?
Yes, the world has activated, particularly our country. We have discovered 93 individuals who have lost their lives. We know that that number is going to increase significantly as the search and rescue operation proceeds. We've added adding additional right now, up to 20 dogs, which will help the discovery and search team sort through the rubble. I mean, it's a catastrophic loss. It's our largest natural disaster since statehood, which was in 1959. At that time, 61 people passed away. And it's incredible what we're seeing. It's definitely like a nuclear weapon went off on Lahaina. So what can I share with you? First of all, we have all the support in the world from the president. We thank him. Within 6 hours of my request, the president activated the presidential emergency declaration. So we have all the resources that we need. We have over 416 FEMA workers on the ground. We've had already opportunities to be with the head of FEMA, and we thank Deanne for coming. We have been with the Small Business Administration as well. We're beginning to rebuild already. Today we went live. Actually, last night we went soft live, and now we're fully live with Operation House Maui, which will give us up to 2,000 housing units or hotels available for all the people at no cost. Of course, FEMA is extremely generous, courtesy of the resources of the American people, to put our people back into housing from the shelters. So we're beginning to support and do all that we can for those who have survived this crisis. We know that the loss of life is so large that it will be felt forever by our people in Hawaii. This is where we are at the moment, but there are 3,000 structures likely destroyed, and we can share any detail you like. I have obviously leaned in every way.
Governor, it's our understanding that so far only 3% of the area has been searched. Do you have a sense of the exact number of how many people are still missing?
Yeah, just for clarification, so that 3% number was what they did yesterday on the ground structures. The outdoor site, which I shared pictures with you from this weekend, much of that was already scoured by our people in our recovery. That's the main street. That's where people were found tragically deceased in cars or in the ocean. So a significant swath of the territory, that kind of mile-long front street, had been assessed. So it's a little deceptive for us to just say 3% because we don't want to confuse people. That's just 3% of the housing and structures. Those will accelerate those percentages now. You probably see it over the course of maybe 6 to 8 days, where I believe they will be able to do the full search and rescue. Let me say this, though. This was essentially a fire hurricane at 1,000 degrees. It melted some people's granite counters. It incinerated metals. So we're heartsick to imagine what we won't be able to find as far as loss of human life. I'm a physician by training in the ER, and I always saw the tragedy up in person, but not like this. And so this will be harder to reconcile exactly how many we've lost. Over the course of a couple days to weeks, though, you're going to hear these numbers go up from the 90s. It will be scores more people that have passed.
And do you have a sense of how many are missing right now, Governor?
Well, those numbers change by the hour.
Okay.
As of earlier this morning, about 1,300 people hadn't communicated. A lot of people dropped everything they had. Their phones were incinerated. And we're now reconnecting people as we open up the road. But it's not going to be, God help us all, if this number of 96, it was 93 very early, then it was 96 just now. Yeah. If this number rises like that, that's not what we anticipate, but we don't want to guess at anything. Like I said, when a fire moves 60 miles per hour at that temperature through a town, it was very difficult for people to escape it.
Governor, I want to ask you about the emergency alert system that residents there say didn't deploy ahead of the wildfires. I know that there has been an investigation launched into specifically what happened there. What can you tell us? What information do you have at this point about what happened there, why those alarms didn't go off?
Sure. So, yes, I called for that investigation personally. In Hawaii, we appoint our attorney general, and so that's my responsibility to ask, in this case, Ann Lopez, our attorney general, to do this full review. What normally we use, historically, we use this alarm system for is we use it for hurricanes, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions. In my 23 years in Hawaii, it hasn't historically been used for wildfires. I myself wrote out many wildfires on the Big Island, and the siren wasn't used. We communicated. In this case, what appears to have happened was that the infrastructure was destroyed at such a great pace that we couldn't have any communications up whatsoever. And when I say you're seeing the ferocity right now in the story of the fire, when it rolled through a fire truck, it essentially incinerated a fire truck. So you can imagine what it did to power lines, telecom lines, everything. So that was one of the problems. I will never make an excuse for not having a siren go off. I'm just trying to explain better that in an era where you've got these climate change storms that go at this pace, we may all across the globe have to assess, number one, how we're going to alert and warn our people because of the ferocity of storms. And two, are we actually going to get serious about our approach to weather and protection? We probably have to change everything unless the world wants to experience these kind of storms.
Let me follow up with you on that first point. I mean, was this a failure of preparedness in the sense that there needs to be a new system in place moving forward?
Well, there will be lots of change for sure. There will be change probably as the world sees what happened to one Hawaii community. Thank God it wasn't our whole island. Can you imagine if it was the entirety of Maui, where there are 140,000 people who live here? You could easily see a superstorm consume whole islands or whole cities on the mainland if we don't prepare. So there will have to be changes in our ways that we prepare for these fire hurricanes, of course. Was it a failure? Look, I have to leave that to the comprehensive review, because for me to say any one person or group of people failed would be just, it would be unfair for me to say that right now, because everyone did all that they could in that moment. One of the challenges, if I may, was that there were like 3 or 4 major fires all going at the same time. And this fire was believed to be extinguished earlier, and then the other fires started to rage. And even now, some of this fire is going. We're about 85% contained in Lahaina, 60% contained, although the fire has not been as vicious without the winds in Kula. But we are a small state far away from everything. We're the most isolated landmass on the planet. So to all of the viewers internationally right now, this is the most isolated landmass in the world. Imagine what can happen if you are in an adjacent state that's dry, if you haven't dealt with all the needs that you might have as the planet dries even further.
Governor,
we should learn lessons.
Speaking of which, people all around the country and the world want to help. Very quickly, what is the best way that they can help the people of your state?
They should go to the Hawaii Community Foundation and donate resources if they feel they have those resources. The people of Hawaii will be here for you forever. You should still support our state, and we will support you, of course. Hawaii Community Foundation, there's making those donations will enable us to purchase the needed food and supplies. Right now, we have so much physical supply, it's difficult for us to even manage it, though we are grateful for it. So that's how I would begin the approach. I will be happy to update you as often as you need, and I can update those needs also. Also, if you have a house in Hawaii and you could add it to our program where we're allowing people to rent and stay in place so they don't have to leave Maui or the other islands, that would be extraordinary. We will be compensating people through federal relief for that. So we know many people have that situation. And finally, just please pray for our lost ones and our firefighters and our police, because what they're seeing is extraordinary.
Governor, thank you so much. We are sending all of those prayers with you and everyone in Hawaii right now. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. And still to come, we have new legal developments in the federal investigation of the president's son following Friday's surprise move by the Justice Department to appoint a special counsel. That's next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Turning now to developments in the investigation into Hunter Biden. Just days after Attorney General Merrick Garland named U.S. Attorney David Weiss special counsel, in a court filing late last night, lawyers for the president's son claimed federal prosecutors reneged on the plea agreement that collapsed in court late last month. This afternoon, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre addressed the appointment of a special counsel for the first time.
This case was handled independently by the Justice Department under leadership of a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney, as you all know. This is consistent with what the president has been saying for a long while now, going way back to his campaign days, that he would restore the Department of Justice independence from political interference from the White House.
Joining me now is NBC News investigative correspondent Tom Winter. Tom, thanks for joining me. So what is the very latest with the special counsel and the plea agreement that fell apart?
Sure, Kristen. In the near term, prosecutors are going to have until noon tomorrow to respond to this idea that the pretrial diversion agreement tied to those gun charges that Hunter Biden could face is actually already in effect because both sides signed it. I expect to be a little bit of back and forth there about was the agreement actually finalized. That may clear up that portion of the proceedings that fell apart on July 26th. The other portion of it, those tax charges that we've spoken about before, that still has to be resolved, and it appears it's not going to be resolved through a plea agreement, as we know from some filings on Friday. So what we expect is in the coming days or perhaps weeks, even months, for charges to be filed in that case. That could come in California in the Central District. It could also be filed in D.C. where you are. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens, but certainly some long-term legal questions for the president's son, even though near-term it appears that there's going to be a back and forth about those gun charges.
Okay, and obviously all of this happening as 2024 fast approaches, and we are in the thick of the presidential campaign. Tom Winter, thank you so much for being with us this hour. We'll be back with more Meet the Press Now tomorrow. NBC News Now coverage continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.